The 8,042nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is Non-proliferation, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of the Republic of Korea to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2017/769, the text of a draft resolution submitted by the United States of America. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2017/769 please raise their hand? The result of the voting is as follows. The draft resolution received 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2375 of 2017. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who want to make statement after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the U.S.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for calling this meeting and allowing us to have this vote. The images from space of Northeast Asia at night show brightness and prosperity surrounding a dark, lonely space that is North Korea. Those images are a good illustration of where the North Korean regime is today. It is alone, it is dark, and it's getting darker. North Korea's neighbors, its trading partners, and the entire international community are united against its dangerous and illegal actions. Today's resolution builds on what were already the deepest cutting sanctions ever leveled against North Korea. We've been down this road before. The Security Council has expressed its condemnation. We've leveled sanctions. But today is different. We are acting in response to a dangerous new development, North Korea's September 3rd test of a claimed hydrogen bomb. Today we are saying the world will never accept a nuclear-armed North Korea, and today the Security Council is saying that if the North Korean regime does not halt its nuclear program, we will act to stop it ourselves. Over the years, we have learned many things about the North Korean regime. We have learned that it does not care about being a part of the community of decent, law-abiding nations. It has violated every United Nations resolution against it. We have learned that the North Korean regime doesn't care about its own people. It has denied them the most basic necessities to finance its weapons program. And we have learned that half measures against the regime have not worked. Previous efforts to bring North Korea to the negotiating table have failed. They have repeatedly walked back every commitment they have made. Today, the Security Council has acted in a different way. Today, we are attempting to take the future of the North Korean nuclear program out of the hands of its outlaw regime. We are done trying to prod the regime to do the right thing. We are now acting to stop it from having the ability to continue doing the wrong thing. We are doing that by hitting North Korea's ability to fuel and fund its weapons program. Oil is the lifeblood of North Korea's effort to build and deliver a nuclear weapon. Today's resolution reduces almost 30% of oil provided to North Korea by cutting off over 55% of its gas, diesel, and heavy fuel oil. Further, today's resolution completely bans natural gas and other oil byproducts that could be used as substitutes for the reduced petroleum. This will cut deep. Further, a large portion of North Korea's revenues come from exports, revenues they use to fund their nuclear program. Last month, we passed a resolution banning its coal and iron exports. Today's resolution bans all textile exports. That's an almost $800 million hit to its revenue. When these new stronger sanctions are added to those passed last month, over 90% of North Korea's publicly reported exports are now fully banned. Moreover, this resolution also puts an end to the regime making money from the 93,000 North Korean citizens it sends overseas to work and heavily taxes. This ban will eventually starve the regime of an additional $500 million or more in annual revenues. Beyond the $1.3 billion in annual revenues we will cut from North Korea, new maritime authorities will help us stop them from obtaining funds by smuggling coal and other prohibited materials around the world by ship. Furthermore, this resolution prohibits all joint ventures with the regime, resulting in a significant amount of lost revenue. But more importantly, the regime can no longer obtain critically needed foreign investments, technology, and know-how needed for its commercial industries. Finally, this resolution imposes asset freezes on the most central North Korean regime entities, affecting both the military and the government itself. In short, these are by far the strongest measures ever imposed on North Korea. They give us a much better chance to halt the regime's ability to fuel and finance its nuclear and missile programs. But we all know these steps only work if all nations implement them completely and aggressively. Today's resolution would not have happened without the strong relationship that has developed between President Trump and Chinese President Xi, and we greatly appreciate both teams working with us. We have seen additional encouraging signs that other nations in Asia have stepped up to the plate. The Philippines has cut off all trade with Pyongyang. Thailand has drastically cut its economic ties with North Korea. And states much farther away are also doing their part. Mexico recently declared the North Korean ambassador to its country persona non grata. Along with strictly enforcing sanctions, these are important steps toward complete international unity. They make clear that all nations can act to deny North Korea the funds to build its nuclear arsenal. Today is a solemn day in the United States. It is the 16th anniversary of the terrorist attacks that killed nearly 3,000 innocent people, most of them in this very city. It hurts as much today as it did 16 years ago. We will never forget the victims of September 11th, and we will never forget the lesson that those who have evil intentions must be confronted. That day, the United States saw that mass murder can come from a clear blue sky on a beautiful Tuesday morning. But today, the threat to the United States and the world is not coming out of the blue. The North Korean regime has demonstrated that it will not act on its own to end its nuclear program. The civilized world must do what the regime refuses to do. We must stop its march toward a nuclear arsenal with the ability to deliver it anywhere in the world. We must do that by cutting off the fuel and the funding that supports it. We don't take pleasure in further strengthening sanctions today. We are not looking for war. The North Korean regime has not yet passed the point of no return. If it agrees to stop its nuclear program, it can reclaim its future. If it proves it can live in peace, the world will live in peace with it. On the other hand, if North Korea continues its dangerous path, we will continue with further pressure. The choice is theirs. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Japan welcomes the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2375. We would like to express our great appreciation to the leadership of the United States, which has made it possible for us to adopt this resolution today. We also thank all other members of the Council for their support. By swiftly adopting Resolution 2375 today, after North Korea's ballistic missile launch on the 29th of August that flew over Japan, as well as 6th nuclear test on 3rd of September, the Security Council sends a clear signal to North Korea and the international community as a whole that North Korea's continuation of their nuclear and missile development can never be accepted. We recently adopted Resolution 2371 unanimously on August 5th in response to the 2 ballistic missile launches of international intercontinental range in July. The resolution was intended to be very impactful, with the expected effect of reducing the revenue of the North Korean regime by approximately $1 billion a year. The resolution we just adopted today will strengthen sanctions against North Korea to an unprecedented level, further reducing the resources that North Korean regime uses to continue its illicit programs. The ban on textile exports from North Korea is expected to reduce its revenue by around $800 million. The resolution also requires countries not to provide work authorizations for North Korean workers who have been an important source of revenue for the North Korean regime. In addition, the oil supply that flows into North Korea is expected to be cut by approximately 30%. This is intended to make great impact on North Korea's continuation of its WMD programs. Today's resolution is an urgent call for the North Korean regime to change its behavior. The Security Council will not back off in the face of North Korea's persistent provocations, which challenge its repeated resolutions. It is the collective will of the international community that we will continue to put maximum pressure against North Korea so that it shows seriousness and takes concrete action towards the goal of denuclearization. We should bear in mind that the Security Council has repeatedly expressed its determination to take further significant measures in the event of a further launch or nuclear test by North Korea. This is again clearly stated in paragraph 31 of this resolution. A peaceful diplomatic solution, which we all want, is in the hands of North Korean regime. If North Korea wants peace and security, it needs to demonstrate concrete measures for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, comply fully with the relevant Security Council resolutions and joint statement of the 6-party talks, and thus come back to the dialogue table. In the meantime, all members of the United Nations must show their renewed commitment to rigorously and thoroughly implement the existing Security Council resolutions, including 2371 and 2375 that we just adopted. Japan will continue to work very closely with the Security Council members and all other member states to reach a comprehensive solution to the problems related to North Korea. Thank you, Mr. President.
The representative of Japan for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Mr. President, France welcomes the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2375, which strengthens the United Nations sanctions on North Korea. I would like to thank the permanent representative of the United States, Nikki Haley, and her team. I would like to also thank every single member of the Council, thank them for their determined commitment to this. Mr. President, the tragic anniversary of the 11th of September that we commemorate today leads me to express once again our profound sympathy towards our American friends and to all of the countries who have been hit by terrorism. This commemoration and the gravity surrounding it invites us also to rise collectively to the height of the collective responsibility on the Council on the most crucial issue of all, the issue of war and peace and the conditions of peace. And it is this question that brings us together today on the topic of North Korea. And that is why, on behalf of France, I would like to send today 3 messages of political nature and express them in the form of 3 requirements. The first demand is the need to be lucid when it comes to the development of the threat we're facing. Let's make no mistake, after the intercontinental ballistic launches this summer, or after the nuclear test in unprecedented scope on the 3rd of September, the threat changed in dimension or even in nature. From regional, it became global. From virtual, it became immediate. And from being serious, it became existential. And this is an illustration of how this threat places demands on us. It brings us together. It also shows us how we need to have a strong and united reaction of the Security Council, something that France called for from the beginning and without reservation. And the first demand placed on us of central nature is the need to be firm. Given the headlong rush forward of irresponsible measure of the regime and the contempt for its international obligation, it is necessary now more than ever to work in unison with determination and quickly. We need to react to this attack against peace and security and the legal system on which it is based. The resolution that we have just adopted is an important and necessary step in this direction in order to put maximum pressure on the North Korean regime. This robust resolution strengthens and indeed widens and does this in a way which is very significant and targeted. It widens the sanctions regime in several areas. And I am referring to unprecedented constraints on the sectors of the economy which directly feed the North Korean regime, such as, for example, the textile sector and North Korean workers. I am referring also to the important restrictions placed on the exports of oil to North Korea. And this resolution also strengthens the tools we have at our disposal in order to prevent the avoidance of sanctions, in particular in the maritime area. The last report of our experts confirmed this. The North Korean regime is becoming increasingly creative when it comes to avoiding sanctions that have been placed on it. Well, let's react to it by also being very creative. Mr. President, this is not just simply being determined and resolute in words. The sanctions are not a leitmotif without a goal. They are not an end in themselves either. Our united reaction, our firm and unequivocal response today meets a double objective. On the one hand, we are reacting to the unjustifiable attitude displayed by Pyongyang, and we're also avoiding sending any signal of impunity given the violations of our own resolutions. But also, and as I said, it also maximizes the pressure on the North Korean regime and does this in order to bring them back to honoring their obligations and to reason. In this context, the third demand, logically and chronologically, is a requirement for diplomacy. And the determination we've expressed today, hopefully that will open the way to diplomacy. The conviction of my country, France, Mr. President, is that maximum determination today in the form of strengthening sanctions is our best tool in order to promote a political settlement tomorrow. And the opposite is also true. Everything that will be perceived by the North Korean regime as a sign of weakness or division amongst us will encourage them to continue with provocations and objectively will heighten the risk of extreme escalation. To put it simply, our firmness that we display today is the best antidote we have given the risk of confrontation and is also our best opportunity to open the way to a political solution, which needs to be based, we think, on the complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We therefore are not closing the door to dialogue. We have never closed the door to dialogue. It's a North Korean regime which persists through its irresponsible attitude, an unacceptable attitude to reject dialogue. For as long as they will remain deaf to our injunctions, for as long as they will continue from provocation to provocation and will heighten their threats, we will have no other choice but to heighten our response through pressure. It's the only solution to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table and open the way to the needed political and diplomatic resolution of this issue. Mr. President, for France, these are the three complementary requirements that need to be guiding us. Lucidity when it comes to the existential nature of the threat, being as firm as possible whilst reacting to it, and diplomacy as our horizon in the service, we hope, of a political solution in order to resolve the nuclear crisis in North Korea. Our security of everyone is at stake, and together with the non-proliferation regime, which is its backbone, we need to react, and we invite all of the parties to continue to gather down this demanding path. I thank you.
Representative of France for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just over a week ago, North Korea sent a brazen message of provocation, a message of belligerence, a sixth nuclear test carried out once again in clear contempt for the Security Council, the region, and the international community. Today, through the unanimous adoption of the resolution, we have sent a message of our own in response. Through this vote, we have made clear that we will not stand idly by in the face of such aggression, that we will not be intimidated or cowed, that we will match North Korean provocations with clear, targeted consequences. Today, we have enacted strategic measures that, together with existing obligations, add up to the most stringent United Nations sanctions regime placed on any nation in the 21st century. We have enacted measures today that show our determination to act. This resolution does three big things. First, it will curtail gas, petrol and oil imports. Second, it will ban all textile exports, taking hundreds of millions of dollars from the revenues that the North Korean regime uses to fund its nuclear and missile programs. And third, it will end future work authorizations of North Korean overseas laborers, stopping a sickening industry built on modern slavery and used to divert funds to the regime. So make no mistake, we are tightening the screw, and we stand ready to tighten it further. Until the regime sees that diplomacy, not duplicity, is the way forward, we must use all of our diplomatic tools to bring pressure to bear on Pyongyang. Some observers doubted that this Council would be willing or able to react speedily, or in unison, or even at all, to this new provocation. But with this resolution, we have shown that we are united in condemning this illegal and reckless act, and that we are determined that the North Korean regime change course. The unanimous agreement today of the states around this table is a powerful step. We now call on all states to redouble their sanctions implementation, taking note of the decisions that we have made today under international law. Mr. President, North Korea is engaged in a dangerous policy of provocation. Our role as a Council and as an international community is to constrain them so that they change course. Sanctions are a vital part of this effort. It is the regime that bears full responsibility for the measures that we have enacted today. It is their continued illegal and aggressive actions that have brought us here. Such actions are in no way a proportionate response to the legitimate, defensive military exercises of South Korea and the United States. There is a way out. Diplomacy can end this crisis. First, North Korea must change its reckless course. There must be an end to the tests, an end to the provocations. Until North Korea changes course, we must maintain the maximum pressure possible. Through this resolution today, we have done just that. The onus now falls on Pyongyang to do the right thing, to step back from confrontation and to step towards de-escalation. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ukraine welcomes the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2375 in response to the 6th nuclear test conducted by DPRK. We commend the strong United States leadership which made this adoption happen. And on this, I just want to use this opportunity also to express our Ukraine solidarity with the people and government of the United States as they commemorate the 16th anniversary of 9/11. I am proud that Ukraine was able to contribute to the Council's reaction to this horrible terrorist act back in 2001 and as a non-permanent member of the Council, including by providing our missions premises for the Council urgent consultations. North Korea's advance in nuclear and ballistic missile programs still remains the most significant proliferation challenge on the global scale. Moreover, the increase in militarization has already severely impacted and continues to threaten the livelihoods of the DPRK population. Besides continuously diverting the resources from the acute human needs to feeding its nuclear arsenal, DPRK succeeded in sanctions evasion. Therefore, we fully support imposing new, robust measures against the North Korean regime, along with strengthening the already existing prohibitions and restrictions. Our today's decision clearly proves that the Council remains united and decisive in its response to the growing nuclear threat on the Korean Peninsula, as well as in its intention to avoid affecting the people of North Korea. I wish to reiterate the key importance of full and comprehensive implementation of all Council's resolutions related to DPRK by all member states of the United Nations to exclude the risk of further provocations and curb rampant nuclear and missile ambitions of Pyongyang. Ukraine voted for the resolution trusting that any responsible member of the international community must spare no effort in restoring respect for international law and finding solutions to counter the greatest threats to global peace and security. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Uruguay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Uruguay welcomes and commends the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2375. In the 21 months that have elapsed since we began to participate in the Security Council, Mr. President, this is the 5th resolution that we are voting on imposing sanctions on North Korea. This is also the 5th time, President, that my delegation affirms that the action of the Security Council and all of its members is crucial to counteract the seriousness constituted by the
the violations of North Korea of the resolutions of the Security Council, threats that is to international peace and security. This is also the 5th time that my country maintains that the nuclear tests and the launches of ballistic missiles step up and increase instability on the Korean Peninsula and exacerbate tensions in the region and are continued provocation of the international community. Mr. President, it is also the 5th time that Uruguay reaffirms the urgent need for the government of North Korea to respect the Security Council resolutions and to cease to perform its ballistic and nuclear program. Uruguay, for the 5th time, is urging this country to abandon its nuclear program in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible fashion, putting an immediate end to all related activities, including the launch of ballistic missiles and other acts of provocation. Mr. President, the sanctions are simply a means to an end, a means to bring the government of North Korea back to the negotiating table. It is necessary to work to achieve a sustainable, results-focused dialogue as soon as possible. Emerging from the North Korean conflict can only be succeeded with dialogue and diplomacy and within the framework of an international strategy which is firmly backed by all countries, a commitment that is to ensure the effect and comprehensive implementation of sanctions provided for by this Security Council. To conclude, Mr. President, it is the 5th time that we reaffirm our unwavering commitment to continue working towards the peaceful, diplomatic and political solution of the North Korean conflict to achieve the ultimate end of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Uruguay for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Italy welcomes the unanimous adoption of this resolution. We thank the United States for leading this process with the appropriate sense of urgency and for conducting this negotiation in a spirit of transparency that we appreciate in light of the constraints that the grave situation provoked by North Korea has determined. In fact, this resolution comes at a moment of unique threat to international peace and security and of a very serious challenge to regional stability. Just 1 week ago, this Council met to condemn the 6 nuclear attacks carried out by the DPRK regime, following a series of increasingly reckless missile launches. We reaffirm our strong condemnation of these irresponsible acts. All of these actions taken together reveal a cycle of unprecedented deliberate and escalatory provocations by North Korea, directed against the international community as a whole and aimed at undermining the foundations of the global non-proliferation regime, as well as the authority of this Council. We reiterate our deepest concern for the advancement of the North Korean nuclear and missile program, which constitutes an unacceptable threat of global nature. Today we are standing united once again by taking action in order to protect our collective security and to ensure that the North Korean regime threats do not go unanswered. The resolution adopted today is a balanced text that provides for a strong, comprehensive package of restrictive measures while taking into account the humanitarian concerns and the need to achieve the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula through a negotiated process. These measures are a reflection of the gravity of the current situation, and they constitute a proportional and appropriate response. This resolution, however, is not only about stronger sanctions. It also sets the political path through which, if it so chooses, North Korea can revert to international legality and to a different pattern of relations with the international community in order to reach a peaceful solution to the situation. We fully share the call of this resolution on the DPRK to immediately cease all nuclear and missile-related activities, and to make credible progress on its obligations to denuclearize and opening the way to a peaceful solution through meaningful negotiations. We also fully share the concerns about the humanitarian situation in the country and the need to ensure that these new sanctions do not have an adverse impact. We must not forget that the people of North Korea are first and foremost victims of the regime's self-isolating ambitions. The international community must therefore continue to provide assistance for those in need. Finally, Mr. President, as chair of the 1718 Committee, we will continue to maintain a sharp focus on full and effective implementation of the sanction regime by the whole membership of the United Nations. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Italy for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, on September this year, DPRK, in defiance of the general opposition of the international community, conducted yet another nuclear test. The Chinese government firmly opposes and strongly condemns such an act. China is consistently committed to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, to the peace and stability of the peninsula, and to the solution of the issue through dialogue and consultation. The resolution adopted by the Security Council today reflects this principle of three commitments and demonstrates the unanimous position of the international community of opposing DPRK's development of its nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities and preserving the international non-proliferation regime. China urges DPRK to take seriously the expectations and will of the international community to halt DPRK's nuclear and missile development, effectively abide by and implement the Council's resolutions, not conduct any more nuclear and missile tests, and effectively return to the track of denuclearization. The resolution simultaneously reiterates the maintenance of peace and stability of the peninsula and that of the Northeast Asia, and commits to resolve the issue through peaceful, diplomatic and political means, supports the resumption of the six-party talks, as well as the commitment contained in the September 19th statement, and emphasizes the importance of de-escalating tension on the peninsula. All parties should effectively and comprehensively implement the relevant provisions contained in the Security Council resolutions. The nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula must be resolved peacefully. Integrated measures must be taken to balance the legitimate security concerns of all parties. China has been making unremitting efforts for the denuclearization and for maintaining peace and stability of the peninsula. On July 4th this year, China and Russia issued a joint statement on the Korean Peninsula. Based on China's proposals of a dual-track approach to promote denuclearization of the peninsula in parallel with the establishment of a peace mechanism on the peninsula and forced suspension initiative of DPRK halting its nuclear and missile activities, and U.S. and ROK's suspension of their large-scale military exercises, and based upon Russia's proposal of a step-by-step approach, both parties formulated a roadmap for the solution of the Korean Peninsula issue. The joint Chinese and Russian initiative is as realistic as it is feasible. It is aimed at tackling both the symptoms and root causes so as to advance the peaceful settlement of the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue and to maintain peace and stability of the peninsula. We hope to obtain the positive response and backing of the relevant parties on this. We hope that the U.S. will incorporate into its specific policies regarding DPRK the four no's of not seeking regime change in DPRK, not seeking a collapse of the regime in DPRK, not seeking an accelerated reunification of the peninsula, and not sending its military north of the 38th parallel. China is a close neighbor to the Korean Peninsula. We have been consistently committed to the denuclearization, and we are against war and chaos on the peninsula. The strengthening of the military deployment out of the Korean Korean Peninsula and the goal of denuclearization and regional peace and stability run counter to each other. The deployment of the third anti-missile system severely undermines regional strategic balance. It undermines the strategic security interests of regional countries, China included. China strongly urges relevant parties to halt its deployment and remove related equipment. At present, the situation on the peninsula is sensitive, complex, and grave. Relevant parties should remain cool-headed and avoid any rhetoric or action that would aggravate the tension. The priority at present is to comprehensively and strictly implement the Security Council resolutions, and the relevant parties should resume talks and negotiation sooner rather than later, endeavor to advance denuclearization and maintain peace and stability of the peninsula. And the Council should undertake its historic responsibility in this regard. China will continue to advance dialogue and consultations, work together with all relevant parties, and make a positive and constructive effort for the appropriate settlement at an early date of the Korean peninsula issue, for attaining denuclearization and for the long-term peace and stability of the peninsula. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Sweden.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The persistent disregard for global norms and consistent defying of UN Security Council resolutions by North Korea puts millions of people at risk. Its actions represent a threat not only to the region, but to all of us. This is indeed a clear threat to international peace and security. For this reason, Sweden welcomes the adoption of today's resolution. In the face of the North Korea's destabilizing actions, it is important that the Council once again stands united and determined to address the most dangerous crisis we are facing today. Mr. President, Sweden reiterates its condemnation of North Korea's recent nuclear test. We once again urge North Korea to heed this Council's decisions and the call of the entire international community that it cease provocations, fulfill its international obligations, engage in meaningful dialogue, and abandon its nuclear weapons and missile programs in a complete, verifiable, and irreversible manner. The strengthened sanctions adopted today aims to add further pressure on the North Korean regime and to contribute to a change of behavior. To achieve this end, the sanctions must be implemented in full. More efforts are needed in this regard. Recommendations by the panel of experts to the Sanctions Committee must be implemented. All UN member states have a responsibility to do their utmost to ensure the sanctions regime works. Mr. President, sanctions alone, though, will not resolve the situation on the Korean Peninsula, nor is there a feasible military option to end the crisis. The solution must be a peaceful, diplomatic and political one. We welcome the call in this resolution for further work to reduce tensions so as to advance the prospects for a comprehensive settlement. Therefore, in parallel to the tightened sanctions adopted today, we must urgently put in place intensified and creative diplomatic efforts to decrease tensions, increase confidence, and prevent escalation, paving the way for dialogue on peaceful and comprehensive solution. It is clear that in order to achieve the longer-term objective, there is a pressing need for a regional security arrangement. The United Nations should provide additional support, especially with regard to confidence-building activities in the region, and we should explore how the good offices of the Secretary General can contribute. The continued provocations by North Korea, as well as the current confrontational rhetoric, are dangerous and risk leading to unintended consequences. In the immediate term, while tensions are running high, lines for direct inter-Korean communication are critical to avoid misunderstanding and miscalculations. As a member of the Neutral States Supervisory Commission, we call on North Korea to assume contact at the border station in Panmunjom.
Mr. President, while the North Korean regime invests in expensive weapons programs, it shows an utter disregard for the well-being of its own people, who continue to suffer from serious human rights violations and a grave humanitarian situation. It is important to underline that none of these measures adopted today or in previous resolutions should prevent or make more difficult the ongoing efforts by the United Nations and its partners to provide life-saving humanitarian assistance. It is also important to note that as the harsh North Korean winter approaches, more support for humanitarian efforts are likely to be needed. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Sweden for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Russia does not accept the claims of DPRK to become a nuclear state and supported all of the Security Council resolutions demanding an end to the nuclear and missile programs of Pyongyang in the interest of denuclearizing of the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, we supported and are supporting the sanctions contained in the resolutions aimed at compelling the DPRK to meet the demands of the Security Council. This fully applies also to the demands of the Resolution 2371, even though when it was being adopted, we underscored that the measure of financial and economic pressure exerted at the leadership of DPRK have been basically exhausted, and any further restrictions could be tantamount to the attempts to suffocating its economy, including a total embargo of the country and provoking a deep humanitarian crisis. In other words, what we're talking about here is not just cutting the channels of feeding the banned nuclear and missile activity, but rather inflicting unacceptable damage on innocent civilians. At the same time, we proposed a reasonable and realistic alternative to the ultimatum logic of the sanctions, which has proven that it was unworkable time and again. The alternative consisted of the following: starting implementing not just the sanction parts of the aforementioned decisions of the Security Council, but also those of the provisions which called for a peaceful political and diplomatic settlement of the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula through dialogue and negotiations. And such provisions are contained in all of the Security Council resolutions. Ignoring them means a direct violation of consensus agreements reached in the Council. Furthermore, the unwillingness of the authors to include into the resolution the idea of using the good offices and the mediation potential of the Secretary General, at the same as well as the denial to reaffirm the statement made by Tillerson on the four no's, the lack of plans to start the war, regime change, the forced reunification of the two Koreas, and violation of the third parallels. All of this gives rise to very serious questions in our minds. We have not yet received answers to those. Russia, as was underscored by President Putin on the 5th of December in China, firmly denounces the recent provocation step by Pyongyang, the test on the 3rd of September. But we're convinced that diverting the gathering menace from the Korean Peninsula could be done not through newer sanctions, but exclusively through political means. That is the approach. That's exactly the approach which was proposed by Russia and China in the joint statement dated 4th of July, the joint roadmap that is on step-by-step moving to the settlements, starting with de-escalation steps and bilateral lowering tensions, and then implementing confidence-building measures and creating the conditions for the resumption of negotiations. We think it's a big mistake to underestimate this Russian-China initiative. It remains on the table at the Security Council, and we will insist on it being considered. We did support the resolution 2375 today because while we remain convinced that there is no future for us if we only try to compel the leadership or move away from the dialogue, whilst we agree with that, we think that leaving nuclear tests without a firm reaction would be wrong. But at the same time, we underscored immediately that the reaction of the Security Council needs to be thought through and needs to take into account the humanitarian aspects of the situation in North Korea, the legitimate interests of the civilians, and the specific measures of bilateral relationship between Pyongyang and foreign partners, which have nothing to do with nuclear missile tests, but would meet the interests of the civilians. In the course of working on the resolution, many of our colleagues stated that this resolution is a prologue for work on political settlement. We would like to, in the very near future, see proof of that and call upon all members of the Security Council and all UN members to undertake specific efforts, not in word, but in deed, in order to find ways for political and diplomatic settlement of the issue of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Senegal.
Mr. President, the delegation of Senegal commends the unanimous adoption by the 15 members of the Security Council of Resolution 2375 on non-proliferation in the DPRK. And we commend the constructive spirit which has prevailed in these negotiations. And we hail the adoption of this resolution under the pen of the U.S. delegation. Its primary responsibility, as the Security Council's primary responsibility, is to maintain international peace and security. This has been enshrined in many resolutions adopted on this issue. Therefore, the Security Council has to take action and had to take action by adopting supplementary measures which considerably bolster the sanctions regimes already in force. Robust, unequivocal reactions is logical. There needs to be as the regime of the DPRK continue to pursue an illegal military regime in flagrant violation of Security Council resolutions as well as non-proliferation resolutions. This nuclear program is, moreover, a direct threat to the security and safety of millions of people that live, work, and move through the region. Therefore, the DPRK did not give prior notice of the launch of ballistic missiles. The H-bomb test on the 3rd September caused an earthquake which was felt in neighboring countries. Mr. President, my delegation wishes to underscore that this set of targeted measures taken quite rightly to respond to the challenge posed by the ballistic missile program of the DPRK must be pursued globally, and political efforts must accompany them in order to encourage parties to engage in dialogue. The ultimate goal being the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The international community needs to lend its full support to such negotiations. It is for this reason that I once again reiterate my country's support for the peaceful resolution of this issue. And therefore I issue an appeal for the Council to continue to work to ensure that people go back to the negotiating table so that the Korean Peninsula is denuclearized. This will ensure ultimately the peaceful coexistence of countries and peoples of the region. Very fortunately indeed, and this is the asset, the strong point of this resolution, paragraph 28, 29 and 30 of the resolution pave the way for a commendable political solution. Now we must rise to the challenge of implementing this resolution. Indeed, this was stated in consultations by the permanent representative of Italy as the chair of the 1718 Sanctions Committee. Implementation is yet leaves to be desired at the moment and must be continued. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Senegal for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Mr. President, Egypt voted in favor of the resolution adopted today out of our unwavering principled commitment to the credibility of the nuclear NPT regime and the credibility and role of the Security Council towards the maintenance of international peace and security. Egypt seeks to set an example on how to seriously deal with any threat to the nuclear NPT regime without double standards. Egypt once again calls upon the DPRK to end its continued violations of Security Council resolutions. We call upon it to return to the NPT as a non-nuclear state. We call upon it to heed the repeated calls to return to dialogue and negotiations towards the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, towards also sustainable peace between the two Koreas. Egypt urges the DPRK to immediately seize any action that would undermine regional security in Northeast Asia or international peace and security. We do so out of our understanding of the nature of the repeated violations by North Korea of the Security Council resolutions, as it threatens international peace and security and regional peace and security as well. It is a serious threat to regional security in the Northeast Asia. Egypt reaffirms its condemnation in the strongest terms of all these violations by North Korea. We support a continued role for the Security Council as it shoulders its responsibilities. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, Egypt calls upon all stakeholders to seek a peaceful settlement of the situation in the Korean Peninsula, in accordance with the provisions of Security Council resolutions, including a revitalization of the six-party talks. This would break the current impasse that fuels more tension and brings about more escalation. Egypt reaffirms the need not to lose sight of the humanitarian considerations and needs as we implement the stringent measures adopted today. In conclusion, Egypt welcomes all constructive ideas and initiatives that would resolve this crisis, a crisis with far-reaching negative repercussions beyond just Northeast Asia, and to do so through negotiations. Egypt supports a key role for the UN in these efforts to promote diplomacy and a political track while maintaining the unity of the international community and the Security Council as we address this crisis with the necessary wisdom. I thank you, Mr.
I thank the representative of Egypt for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Kazakhstan.
Mr. President, Kazakhstan welcomes a unanimous resolve of the member states of the Security Council to urge North Korea to stop its nuclear program by adopting today's resolution, which is tougher and wider in its sanctions regime. We deplore the fact that DPRK continues to tirelessly violate UN Security Council resolutions that inevitably leads to greater consequences for the country and its leadership. Despite the urgent appeals and rejection by the world community of its provocative actions, the DPRK is firmly continuing to develop its nuclear missile potential that poses a threat to peace and destabilizes the situation in the East Asian region and globally. And we're not talking here about a virtual threat, but about a real threat to the people of neighboring countries and beyond. After a series of launches of improved ballistic missiles, the DPRK once again shocked the planet with its horrible nuclear test. The responsible policy of DPRK negatively affects the global process of nuclear non-proliferation and undermines collective efforts to ensure a nuclear weapon-free future of the planet. As a country seriously affected by nuclear tests, Kazakhstan is strongly opposed to such heinous violations. We are strongly convinced that in the 21st century, there is no place for nuclear tests. Proceeding from its principal position, Kazakhstan supports the new resolution, hoping that it will send a very clear and strong message to Pyongyang that the world does not accept the nuclear policy of North Korea. We hope Pyongyang will hear the call and act accordingly. The resolution envisages tough sanctions as the means to persuade Pyongyang to change its course in favor of nuclear weapons-free future. At the same time, it also leaves room for resumption of dialogue, if North Korea really wants it. Once again, we call on the DPRK to heed the message of humanity and seek the path of prudence and dialogue. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kazakhstan for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of Bolivia.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Mr. President. Bolivia once again expresses its strongest condemnation of the nuclear tests and ballistic missile tests undertaken by the DPRK. We issue an appeal once again to this country to abandon its nuclear program and its ballistic missile program in a complete, verifiable and irreversible fashion. We urge this country to comply with the provisions of Security Council resolutions. Bolivia, as part of the first region of the world declared as the first nuclear weapons-free zones, pursuant to the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, better known as the Tlatelolco Treaty. As party to that treaty, we voted in favor of this resolution. This was a move that we took, driven forward by our vocation as a peace-loving nation and one against the fabrication of nuclear weapons and the use thereof, because this would be a grave violation of treaties in this area, a grave violation of human rights and a violation of the right to life itself. Mr. President, we believe that these sanctions must not be an end in themselves. Sanctions rather must serve to bring parties to the negotiating table, bearing always in mind the humanitarian situation as it prevails. In this case, the humanitarian situation of the people of North Korea. Sanctions alone will not resolve the situation. And if there is a shortfall of political and diplomatic solutions, we will see a collective failure of the Security Council to act appropriately. In this connection, Bolivia, as part of paragraph 27 of Resolution 2371. Pursuant to that, proposes to the Security Council to initiate as soon as possible work in order to bring parties to the negotiating table and to recommence six-party talks. We urge avoiding any act of provocation, any unilateral action, or any action taken outside international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter. And we once again reiterate our support for the China initiative, which will make it possible to bring down tensions in the Korean Peninsula. We have the Russian roadmap also, and that's the only tangible proposal that we have on the table to resolve the situation as it prevails. Mr. President, Bolivia once again issues an appeal to all parties to discard any alternative solution which is military in nature or which threats the use of force. We urge all parties to return to the negotiating table to achieve a peaceful diplomatic and political solution whose result is the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Bolivia for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Ethiopia. We welcome the unanimous endorsement of Resolution 2375 we just adopted, which we believe is an appropriate response from this Council after the series of provocative actions by the DPRK, which is a dangerous escalation of the situation in the Korean Peninsula. The latest move by the DPRK has made the situation even more dangerous. It's absolutely vital that we continue to maintain Council unity on this very serious matter, which has the potential to get easily out of hand with all the consequences that possibility would imply. The resolution just adopted is very much mindful of this when it underscored its concern that developments on the Korean Peninsula could have dangerous, large-scale regional security implications. We are pleased that it is this awareness which explains the unity within the Council that we continue to see. This is amply demonstrated in the result of the negotiations, which this resolution is an affirmation of. We believe there is no military solution to the crisis in the Korean Peninsula, and we hope this resolution and the unity among Council members would facilitate the search for a comprehensive diplomatic solution, which is sufficiently stressed in this same resolution. All efforts should be made to make sure that this happens sooner than later, because the alternative to a peaceful resolution of the crisis is, to put it mildly, hardly a viable option. Let me conclude my brief remark by expressing appreciation for the flexibility demonstrated by all those who played an active part in the finalization of this resolution, and for the wisdom which is so manifest in the final product. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, first of all, I'd like to thank you for convening today's meeting to follow up on our discussion earlier last week regarding North Korea's 6th nuclear test on the 3rd of September. I very much appreciate the opportunity to participate in this important discussion. Mr. President, the Republic of Korea welcomes and fully supports the adoption of Security Council Resolution 2375, which introduces new robust sanctions measures on North Korea in response to its most powerful nuclear test to date, conducted in defiance of the repeated warnings of the international community. We appreciate the leadership of the United States, which has been crucial in bringing about this resolution. We know how difficult it is to secure such a significant negotiated outcome within a week's time frame. Our appreciation also goes to the other members of the Council, especially China and Russia, for their cooperation, without which the adoption of this resolution today would not have been possible. Unanimous adoption of this resolution in such a swift manner reflects not only the sense of urgency on the part of the Security Council in addressing North Korean nuclear problem, but also the true gravity of the situation on the Korean Peninsula caused by this unjustifiable act in flagrant violation of international norms and obligations. The adopted resolution contains the strongest measures ever against North Korea. Not only will the oil supply to North Korea be substantially reduced, but North Korea will also lose two of its largest income sources, namely textile exports and overseas laborers. We believe that these measures, if fully implemented, will significantly undercut North Korea's capability to pursue further nuclear weapons development. The resolution also sends a clear message to Pyongyang that enough is enough. Continuing on the wrong path will only deepen its isolation, seriously endanger its political stability, and hinder its economic development. This is surely not what North Korea desires, but it is what it will certainly face if it does not change its course immediately. Mr. President, by introducing the most biting and robust measures in this new resolution, the international community has reaffirmed its unwavering commitment to remain united in stopping North Korea's further pursuit of nuclear weapons. Our goal is not to bring North Korea to its knees, but to achieve a peaceful solution to the North Korean nuclear issue. Under the current circumstances, where North Korea categorically rejects any kind of dialogue with any country in the world, there are simply no viable options other than scaling up sanctions to make Pyongyang come back to the negotiating table for denuclearization. Strong economic sanctions are undoubtedly the only diplomatic means available to this end under the present circumstances. In order to make North Korea awaken from its delusion to become a nuclear weapon state, I call upon all the members of the international community to fully and thoroughly implement the measures in all relevant Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2375 adopted today. Pyongyang will then feel the real pains of sanctions this time around. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.